Adamir, feel free, or Amdir, wherever you want to go, man. Are you an atheist, by the way?
I lean that way, and then
Okay, great. So, feel free, go wherever you want.
So there's one point I want to make about worldviews, and then I want to let Impulse say something if he wants to say something as well. The point I want to make about worldviews is that what I take worldviews to be something distinct from what theism and atheism is. So theism and atheism, I understand as propositional attitudes towards the propositions God exists or no gods exist, respectively. And worldviews I take to be just the total collection of propositional attitudes that someone has. So there's going to be propositional attitudes about God, about the mind, about science, about mathematics, logic, ontology, metaphysics, whatever, whether they affirm certain theses, deny certain theses, or agnostic to certain theses. And I'm not sure how the process of showing somebody's worldview to be false is ever going to allow you to conclude an atheism simplicator is false. So I'm wondering how you're going to bridge that gap between the world, some particular atheist worldview is false or can't account for knowledge or can't account for some category, to atheism simplicator is false, or atheism simplicator in principle cannot account for these categories.
Well, are you familiar with, like, when you talk about worldviews, you're negating that atheism has a worldview?
Atheism is a propositional attitude, at least the way that I understand
it. It presupposes metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology, and every worldview is composed by those three legs. And so whether you're knowledgeable of what your position is on universal metaphysical categories or your relationship to epistemology is irrelevant to the fact that once you're an atheist and you make the statement that the whole universe is only material and it's going through these evolutionary changes, that then puts you in a position where you only have so many ways to go.
Yeah, but I think what Andrew was trying to say is that you're specifically targeting specific atheistic views. So like you can be like maybe you could be like a supernaturalist and believe in ghosts or something like that and be an atheist, and you could be a materialist and believe and be an atheist. I think the idea is that atheism is compatible with multiple worldviews.
That's why I made my critique that wasn't dependent on a worldview, but the simple dialectical proposition between the purposeful and intentional, whether you assent to that or don't assent. Okay, so that I literally reduced it to the two propositions and avoided the whole worldview argument at all, which would be atheism simpliciter.
Sorry,
anything that you want to fit in that's not an affirmation of a personal deity that purposely creates the world.
And let's go back to the garden.
Yeah, sorry, the part that's unclear to me, so it's unclear to me how you're going to show a particular set of beliefs that they fail in some respect to a particular belief in the set is false, is the inference that I'm taking issue with. If the inference is atheism simplicator, so just the proposition God does not exist, entails something self-contradictory, then I'm going to be on board with you. I'm going to agree. You've showed that atheism, under any worldview, anybody who holds to atheism is going to have a false view or a contradictory view, or they're not going to be able to account for certain things.
That is exactly what he argued, though.
So what's the argument for that?
So you only have, ultimately, you're going to have to reduce it to two principles, right? Now you could fit whatever, and we could talk about that later, under those two principles. But the first kind of principles would either you assent and you assume that there is a purposeful creator that's personal, that creates the world on purpose, okay, or not. There is no purposeful, whether you make the positive affirmation or just say, I don't know, the fact of the matter is ultimately the reality of that's going to reduce to can you think of a third option? It's sort of like she's either pregnant or she's not, right? So it doesn't reduce to worldviews and sets of propositions, but simply identity statements on kind of first principles. Either it's purposeful intentionalism or it's accidentalism. Now, every possible, even impossible world, atheistic worldview would fit under the accidentalism, is what I'm saying.
Not
So
only
can we clarify quickly what we mean by accidentalism?
Yeah, that's what same thing I was gonna ask.
Yeah, go ahead. Did I interrupt somebody? Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So I gave an example just so everybody can understand this. If I crashed my car on purpose, right? So I'm an intelligence, I have a mind, and I direct my actions to the wall. Why? Because I'm going to collect on my insurance, whatever. Get the money for a new car. You would say, oh, he drove his car into the wall on purpose. What's the only other option? If it's not on purpose, it's what?
Not on purpose? It's,
Yeah,
it's either on purpose or not on purpose. I agree with that.
Yeah, what's the other word we use for not
Accident,
on purpose?
yeah.
It was he crashed his car into the car wall on what? It was a accident.
Now, what I'm curious about here is, if by accidentalism, all you mean is not a purposeful creative act by a personal creator, or if you have some further implication there that it's in some sense random or undirected.
Well, of course, it's got to be so directedness. Obviously, is an anthropomorphic term. It implies intelligence, right?
Oh no, I don't agree with that.
Oh,
So
really?
I think that there's not gonna, if all you mean here is, so the dichotomy is there's a purposeful creative personal creator which acts purposefully to create the universe, or there's this sort of undirected, accidental, random state of affairs which is responsible for the universe, then I don't think that's going to be a true dichotomy, because there's several other options. One would be a purposeless personal creator. That would be a third option. A fourth option would be a directed, non-personal, non-purposeful creator. That would be a fourth option. There's more
what I didn't say is that in the dichotomy, that the only thing that fits under there is atheism. But the dichotomy still remains. So I could fit other worldviews in there. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree that not only atheism is going to fall into the second category. My gripe is that those aren't the only two categories. If the dichotomy is a purposeful, creative, personal creator or random undirectedness, then that wouldn't be a true dichotomy.
Well, it's still accidentalism, right? So whether you're an atheist and say, well, there is no being, or one says there is a being but doesn't direct something, it's still accidentalism, right?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to get clear that we weren't baking anything in there about directedness or randomness into the second horn.
So how would a cause that's not intelligent, I'm thinking of a deistic, direct something to an end, I guess. Maybe you're right. I'm just thinking through this. Go ahead.
Well, there's one response in the literature Alex Malpass gave in his debate with Luke Barnes on the fine-tuning argument. Not sure if you've seen it or not, but he put forward this hypothesis that there's naturalism with a mysterious disposition. The idea was that naturalism has the sort of disposition that gives rise to life-permitting conditions in approximately the same degree of possible worlds that like an all good being would. The idea is that there's just some mystery as to why the disposition is that way, just like there's some mystery in the theist case as to why why God has the specific desires or attributes that he has, which restrict the possibility space to life-permitting universes. And that would be a possible theory, which would fall into that second part of the disjunct, that theory that Malpass.
Let me see if I got it correct. So it's logically possible there could be something that's non-intelligent that causes and directs things to its end, but we wouldn't know the mechanism. Did I get that correct?
I didn't. Well,
I'm trying to figure out the experience.
I don't know that the mechanism is the important part here. The point is that there's that directedness. Yeah. So there would be some sense of directedness.
Okay, so, but I got that fair, right? As long as I get that rid of it.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, if that's a possibility, then how do I actually determine that that's a possibility, or be able to distinguish between accidentalism and directedness?
What do you mean? How would you do
that possibility is an epistemic justification?
Well, I'm not saying the possibility is an epistemic justification. All I was saying is that if that would fall into your second category, so if that sort of theory that Malpass had falls into your second horn of the disjunct, if you would consider that accidentalism, then I agree that that's a true disjunct. But if that's not considered accidentalism, then it's not a true disjunct. There's a third option.
So I guess the problem with that is that I'd have to ultimately go back to that disjunct, because to understand if that's even a possibility, because if you know anything about modal arguments, logical conceivability is not a good guide to logical possibility. In other words, I need some sort of kind of epistemic principle to even actually justify that that's even a coherent logical possibility. Let me give you an example of, in the literature, of how conceivability, which we just conceived of what would conceivably, no pun intended, be a logical possibility. I don't actually know if it's a logical possibility, and therefore serving is a third option that would break the disjunct. Okay.
Well, I mean, if we want to play that game, like maybe none of them are horns of the disjunct. Maybe I'm not sure if conceivability will lead me to think that any of those three are the right one. Like that just doesn't, it seems like you're just not playing the game anymore. Get that?
Oh, no, that's very different, because I'm not making the argument, my argument of disjunct about depending on conceivability or logical possibility. The objection is making that. And so I need to know then, I need a good epistemic clarifier that is it actually a logical possibility, or is it a nonsensical statement just because I thought I conceived it. An example would be, it seems conceivable that there's a largest prime number. In other words, what do we mean? And it seems logically possible.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, when I conceive of it, I'm not contradicting myself in conceiving it. Therefore, it's logically possible. So conceivability leads to logical possibility. Now, the problem is it requires some education, some data to come in, namely Euclid's proposition and proof that, in fact, what seemed to be conceivable and logically possible is actually logically impossible. So simply us bringing up that it seems conceivable and therefore logically possible that this third option ends up being it deflates. I can't actually say that that's even a possibility, that's a logical possibility as a third option. Do you see what I'm saying? But my argument doesn't depend on that, so I'm not open to that.
Well, you're presenting two things. So a disjunct of a purposeful, creative, personal creator, or some sort of like undirected, accidental origin of reality. And there is an assumption when you present this disjunct that those two things, that those are logically possible. Now, I don't see why there's any reason to suppose that this third option I gave is any less logically possible than those. And I will clarify, I've never said that conceivability is a guide to possibility. In fact, my understanding of the literature, conceivability is only a defeasible guide to possibility. So until you have some overriding reason to think that something is not logically possible, it being conceivable just gives you some reason or evidence in favor of believing that it's possible. So in the case of the prime numbers, you have a mathematical proof that's going to be sufficient to defease the justification that you might get from the conceivability. That's just my understanding of how conceivability is used in modal epistemology.
I don't think so. From the literature, it's not until kind of shown otherwise. Typically, the way to establish feasibility is becoming specific enough. So typically the error in conceivability to logical possibilities is too general. And so you have to kind of hammer out the details of so it's not like, well, we don't have any objections against it, therefore it's feasible. It typically wouldn't be assented to across the board in modal logic and philosophy until it's like, no, it meets some type of kind of sufficient criteria of specificity. And therefore, because the mistakes that always occur are simply, for example, the prime numbers, right? It's too general, right? I don't have the kind of details to actually make that wide of a claim and therefore can never enter into possibility. So typically the solutions agreed, there has to be some type of sufficient specificity that would get out, which just pushes the question back to, well, what constitutes as a specific, a sufficiently specific criteria for that, which I think all of the philosophers in modal logic are wrestling. It's not like anybody's, well, I got it, I figured it out, right?
So, yeah, I mean, even if conceivability is broader than logical possibility, which I probably grant that it is, I don't think that means that conceivability is not like a good defeasible guide to logical possibility, because logical possibility is also a very broad modality. It's usually considered the broadest modality. But that's the important point here is I don't see a reason to think that this is any less logically possible than the purposeful, creative, personal being or the accidental, undirected thing in your dichotomy. I'm not seeing what's so special about this third option I gave that's making me doubt that is logically possible.
Now, first of all, I could possibly go a third option and show that, let's suppose there's three options and the two are defeaters for knowledge. I could go that, but I'm just not at this point convinced that there's any reason to believe that a non-intelligent being could, or a non-intelligent entity or substance could direct something. So it's too, what you put is too general and vague to me to get me even into the category of feasibleness. And it's like, what would that even look like? How would you even begin to explain, let alone justify, that non-intelligent being could direct that something to a particular end? So
the amount of mystery involved in this this mysterious disposition view that Malpass puts forward is about the same amount of mystery in the theist hypothesis. So it's about how do you have something intelligent that's ordered in such a way that it has the abilities and dispositions and whatever desires or properties are necessary to bring about the state of affairs such that we see them. That seems just as mysterious as how do you have something that's has this dispositional properties to do the same. But either way, maybe let's say that we can't justify it, right? To get to every non-theistic view is impossible. You have to get get to more than I can't justify the third option. You have to get to the second and third options, or the three options or two options, depending on what we want to go with. They exhaust the possibility space, and also all of the ones except for theism are false, not unsubstantiated or unmotivated, but false. And it's really unclear to me how we're going to get there.
Well, first, just in principle. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. Oh, we lost our friend. Oh, he's coming back in. Go ahead. Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
I think you need to go back to the Garden of Eden and what was the lie the serpent told to the woman? That she could be as God. And this is the fundamental problem with everything that's come about in philosophy and everything, is that man has decided that they are the ones who are going to determine the criteria for truth. And it's man, self-centered man, that decides all this stuff. And like, there's no such thing as an atheist. They either they believe in the God of the Bible, or they believe in themselves as gods who determine reality and how everything works. And that's what this guy is doing. I don't know. Like, I have a hard time. Like, I think that should be pursued more often, is the fact that man has determined that he is the arbiter of truth. And
yeah, let me pick up on that. Let me Amdir, let me just comment real quick that first of all, do you know the Orthodox position on this? Because I don't want to be simply thrown under theism. In fact, I brought up
I don't know.
Theism and monotheism are actually fairly recent. Under Henry Moore I think that was I'm trying to remember. Somebody look up the date on Henry Moore. It's pretty late that those terms even came into history. So I certainly want to make a distinction from general theism and not to be categorized that. So you'd said that, well, look, you have the same problem as a theist. Well, I don't want to actually be categorized in that. So do you know what the Orthodox position is as far as does it appeal to the mystery and what we were saying, such that we have the same problem that maybe other theists do?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know the intricacies of Orthodox theology. I'm aware of what Orthodoxy is. I'm sure I probably follow some people that you know of. Like, I've listened to Jay Dyer debates, read a little bit of Bonson and Van Til. I think some of those are Orthodox people. They might not all be Orthodox people.
Just Jay Dyer.
Only Jay Dyer? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought one of those other two philosophers were Orthodox, but maybe not. But yeah.
So you're admitting you don't know if the creed.
I don't know Orthodox theology. No,
it applies to us on that. That's fine. I'll settle with that. We could, if this isn't helpful, if the dichotomy isn't helpful, and again, this is kind of more rhetorical, right? Do I think it works? Do I think I can defend it? That's fine. But I mean, we could sit here and argue about that all night. It's not the only argument within what I would call the transcendental argument for the Orthodox transcendental argument for the existence of God. I think that, and sometimes depending on our audience, we switch what part of the argument is because, hey, maybe this works better. Maybe there's nothing wrong with that, I think, on any side.
Right.
I want to give
debate and argumentation. So I think that would help you to understand it.
What's that, Amdir?
Oh, you were cutting in and out a little bit.
Oh, okay.
What I was saying is that it's perfectly acceptable on all sides of debate that if a particular argument isn't being received or it's going to carry us through, you could switch the argument. I'm willing to accept that. And so, although I think we could argue about the dialectic, right, and make an argument, it's not the only argument that I depend on for making an Orthodox transcendental argument for the existence of God. I think particularly the issues that you're bringing up that could be relevant, that would speak to you and your concerns, that sunomosologist, how do I pronounce brought up, is the argument that I developed based roughly on Chisholm's criterion problem. Are you familiar with Chisholm's criterion problem?
No, I'm not. Sorry.
Anybody?
What's Chisholm's name in the book?
Roderick Chisholm's comes from, hold on, let me just pull up the citation.
Yeah, I've heard of Roderick Chisholm.
In case you guys want to, yeah, I'm trying to remember what work it comes from specifically. I have a citation for here. I can just bring it up. You can look at it later. I can just basically briefly explain the problem with criterion.
Yeah, it's about how.
Oh, you said the problem with the criterion. That's what you said.
Yeah, that's what I said.
I'm familiar with the problem with the criterion.
Yeah, it's Chisholm's.
So this argument inspired me to think about something else.
We can chat about the problem of the criterion if you want. That's something Impulse and I have spent some amount of time thinking about.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different than that. I'm just saying I was studying and reading it, and it gave me another idea of something similar. The difficulty, whether it can be resolved or not, that it's pointed out with Chisholm, is there's some sort of kind of dialectical tension, right? That number one, epistemology requires answering what are we justified in believing. In other words, what's the extent of our justified beliefs? And number two, what makes our beliefs justified? What are the criterion for justification? And then Chisholm points out, well, in order to answer one, I have to answer two, and I can't answer two without one. Now, I was just particularly fascinated of how these kind of dialectical tensions work in philosophy. Whether it be like you've got one card that says, on the side of the card that says, the proposition on the other side is false or true, and then you flip it over and it says false. Just these kind of self-referential and dialectical tensions interest me, and then it got me to start thinking about something else, and then I worked this into my own tag. So this argument is not from Chisholm. It's in my own publications. I'm just saying I'm giving a hat tip to Chisholm because it inspired me to start to think about how these things work. Metaphysics, right? Whatever the world is and looks like in principle, whether it's like you said, a non-intelligent entity that can causally direct, complete randomness, so whatever the story is, somebody's going to have at least some assumptions on that. And even if they don't, I think we could all admit that the way the world is going to determine whether we can know and how we know, correct? And we can imagine a world in which it's such a way that there are no knowers, a world of rocks. So all of that's to illustrate metaphysics determines epistemology, correct?
Mm-hmm. By metaphysics determines epistemology, you just mean that the world could be a way that's non-conducive to knowledge, right?
Yes. Yeah. And then whatever the way the world is, gives an account and determines epistemology, how and what we know and blah, 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 right?
I agree that metaphysics determines like there's like two questions. There's like what's knowledge conceptually, and then what are the knowledge conducive conditions? I think metaphysics determines the second one. Not so sure about the first.
And I just mean metaphysics in the sense of ontology then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got you. If you mean metaphysics,
they have non-existing things.
Yeah, if you mean like the conditions that are conducive to knowledge or contingent on specific metaphysical laws or principles, then yeah, I agree.
And therefore, epistemology is, in that sense, contingent upon metaphysics.
Yeah, in that sense.
Okay. Which puts me in a really interesting position then. I need to know. So if my metaphysics in that sense determines my epistemology, then I need to know. Am I a butterfly now? I need to know which I need to, where am I in my hands here? I need to know which metaphysics is actually true. So the way that I phrased this in a paper was I have to put my epistemological cart before my metaphysical horse. And then it's like when I ask that, then I put my metaphysical cart before my epistemological horse. And I have something very similar to what Chisholm described. It's not identical, but it's a similar problem, right? Of this sort of kind of dialectical tension. Yeah. And I ask myself, well, why is this occurring? And I won't be able to resolve it, right? Because I'll always be stuck in one of those categories, right? Limited by one of those categories, bound, right? Such that I can't answer the other one without the other, and I can't answer the other without the one. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So yeah. Ooh, I have something to say here, but I just know that Impulse wants to cut in on this, so I'm inclined to let him cut in here.
So okay, so I do have. So just to understand you correctly, you're saying that you have to know the metaphysics before you know the epistemology. Is that how I'm understanding you? I mean, do I have you correctly? Yeah. Okay. So the thing is that, like, well, given I'm gonna be talking for myself and Amdir here because I guess we share very similar views on this. We were both externalists when it comes to epistemology. So I actually deny, and I think myself and Amdir do deny, that we have to know our metaphysics to know the epistemology. So that's just that's kind of like a form of the KK principle in a sense. But yeah, that's just, I think if you guys are familiar with externalism about epistemology. No?
I know all about it, yeah.
Yeah. So since the type of externalism that myself and MDR prefer is going to be a type where justification doesn't actually play a role in our epistemic or like in our knowledge. So there's just going to be a type I don't know if you ever heard of the view virtue reliabilism or a robust virtue epistemology. That's the view that we prefer, and under that view we're just going to deny the thesis that you have to know your metaphysics to know the epistemology.
Well, I don't think, first of all, I don't think it's related to the KK thesis that you have to know that you know, because that's still within the epistemological category. The fact of the matter is reliabilism and externalism is a metaphysical assertion. Correct?
About
it is a account of how the world works such that things are justified or no.
How we know. We're talking about knowledge here.
If you're talking about like knowledge conceptually, I think it's just a semantic question.
I'm not talking about knowledge conceptually. I'm saying you made a metaphysical claim. Externalism is a and reliabilism is a mechanistic claim about how the world works.
Right.
That then spills into the epistemological category, right? And so what I'm saying is you're not in a position to actually assert that reliabilism or internalism is the way that it goes. So basically what you're caught in is, well, just grant me my metaphysical assumption so that I can actually justify my epistemology without having to do epistemology. And if you go into the category of epistemology, then what you're saying is, well, you're putting it's not to know that you know, or an infinite regress or anything like that. What you're doing is you're categorically putting things by your own admission in the wrong categories. you're putting epistemology, which you admit is determined and contingent upon the metaphysical description of reliabilism, but for the epistemology that's determined before the metaphysics.
So
you're
I want
making it consistent as a self-defeater.
Yeah, so I want to get clear here about exactly which metaphysical claim you think we're forwarding or asserting, because there's two claims that I'm identifying here that you mentioned. One is the the externalism. The other is the reliabilism. So the reliabilism, the way Impulse and I take reliabilism is a conditional. So if your competency, if your true believing is manifesting your competencies in certain conditions, then you know. It's an if-then statement. So it's not making a statement about the way the world is. It's just making a conditional statement about when knowledge of in which conditions knowledge obtains. And what knowledge is going to be a semantic thesis. So it's really unclear to me on our view what the metaphysical claim is that we're making here.
Hold on, I've created an argument to refute the conditional. I've just got to remember. Just give me a second on this, because I actually wrote this on paper, and it's a complicated argument. I just need to recall it. So anybody can talk. I'll try to look that argument up, but it's an interesting. It's an interesting objection. I don't think that it actually works. I just got to recall what the argument is that I actually came up with on that. So if anybody wants to chime in while I look for that argument, go ahead.
Well, I would like to pose a question to Impulse and Amdir, and I appreciate you guys coming on, and you guys have been very respectful. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Do you not feel that externalism is making a metaphysical assumption about the way the world works?
I don't see that it necessarily is. I think particular externalists might. I don't think that the way I construe externalism, there's a metaphysical claim that I'm making, but I'm open to being shown that there is.
Can you explain how you construe externalism?
Yeah, so the way that I'll just kind of lay out the theory of knowledge, I guess. What I take knowledge to be is apt true belief, and I take it to be a semantic thesis about how people are generally using language. Or I can just make a weaker claim, that's how I'm using the language. And we can leave it at that weaker claim. And then we're just gonna say, so the idea of what beliefs count as knowledge are just gonna be those beliefs that are apt true beliefs. It's just something conditional. And we can unpack each of those concepts further. If you're worried there's a metaphysical assumption in like apt, true, or belief, we can unpack each of those to get at what those mean, if that's the concern. But yeah.
I'm almost there. I remember the paper I wrote it in. Sorry, I might be fairly decent at logic and philosophy, but I'll tell you what. Boy, my memory is not the best. So, but thank God I remember what paper I wrote it in. So keep going. I'm gonna pull it up.
There's a paper. It's by Fernando Brancano Ferraro. I want to say I might have his name a little bit wrong. Okay. It's called A Robust Enough Virtue Epistemology, and that paper kind of lays out the type of view that Impulse and I prefer.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this paper. Let me pull it up.
Let me know if you found it. I might have had the name wrong.
I'm not finding. I'm finding. No, I see a paper by J. Adam Carter and a paper by Georgi.
If you search the name of the paper, A Robust Enough Virtue Epistemology, you should see it.
Got it. Let me.
And Orth couldn't get it up. Just go to academia.edu and pull it up real quick.
Yeah, that's what I'm on too.
Academia.edu. but we're all on.
Did you find the paper? If not, I can link it to you in chat.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and link it.
Got it.
There we go.
Ah, perfect.
Hey, you guys are great. Can I
Beat me
just
to
say,
it.
like, you're very respectful.
Yeah, this has been a great
Um,
conversation. I appreciate both of you guys coming on. Thank you.
You've got some great. You've obviously familiar with the literature. We really do appreciate this. You've got some great objections, and just thank you. I just appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having this open discussion.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it.
I'm still getting it. It says the XML file does not appear to have any style information associated with it. I can't pull up the link you guys shared.
Oh. Why did it do that?
Do you have an account to Do you have an account in academia?
Me?
Academia.edu.
I do.
PTH?
Or
Okay.
I do.
You should be able to find it there pretty easily.
Okay.
Actually, if you just search the title, that's actually where we got it.
Okay. Oh, yep, found it. Fernando Broncano. Yep, found it. Okay, let me read this abstract. What is the nature of knowledge?
Oh, it's Brentano.
No, I got Fernando Broncano Barrocall.
Okay, never mind.
Is that the one you guys were talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the abstract, just for people watching, so they're clued in while we're talking, it is, what is the nature of knowledge? A popular answer to the long-standing question comes from the robust virtue epistemology, whose key idea is that knowing is just a matter of succeeding cognitively, i.e. coming to believe a proposition truly, due to an exercise of cognitive ability. Versions of robust virtue epistemology, further developing and systematizing the idea, offer different accounts on the relation that must hold between an agent's cognitive success and the exercise of her cognitive abilities, as well as of the very nature of those abilities. This paper aims to give a new robust virtue epistemological account of knowledge based on a different understanding of the nature and structure of the kind of abilities that give rise to knowledge.
Okay, I found my argument.
Okay.
So this is after I provide a critique of internalism, which you guys will be fine with, I'm sure. It does relate somewhat to first and second order knowledge. So, Patrick, should we just explain briefly to our audience what? Because we're using all this technical jargon.
Yeah, I think
I'd like the audience to at least halfway follow along. Is that okay?
Yeah. Feel free. I think people are enjoying it, but I think the hearing the vernacular of philosophy, I think is useful for people. No, it's good. This is how you get precise about ideas. But I think, unless you've dealt with this type of stuff, this is a foreign language to most people.
So, first order knowledge, what Tarski would call, I guess, object language. So suppose this. Let's just make it easy, because there's many different things you get both first and second order knowledge. Second order is like a meta language or meta knowledge. So there's real clear. There's a difference between S knows that P and the statement S knows that P. Does everybody get that? And typically what we would do in philosophy is we put statements in brackets. Does everybody follow me on that? So there's the fact of the matter, the object. And that person S over there knows that P. Clearly there's got to be a distinction between that reality and my statement about S knowing P. So one could be the subject's knowing something is a first order knowledge. Second order knowledge would be knowledge about the statement. And as you guys had pointed out, too, knowing that you know would be a second order. I mean, there's many things that could fall into the second order knowledge. KK thesis would be one of them.
Yeah.
For my purpose, I just want to make the distinction that the person over there, S, knows that P is first order if they know it. A person S stating that they know, or the S knows, is a second order knowledge. Everybody, that's pretty clear, right? I don't think it needs to be.
If they indeed know that S knows.
If they, yeah, if and only if they know. That's correct. I'm going to agree with you guys and say that it's not necessary to have second order knowledge is not necessary to have first order knowledge. That was implicit in your statement. I picked up on it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. However, the question is not about particular propositions of knowledge. The focus of the concern here that I want to draw your attention to is about being able to justify the possibility of knowledge in general. So I think to go that route for the KK, the whole issue is a red herring, because what I really want to know is about knowledge in general. So in other words, whether it is the person knowing or another person making a claim about another person knowing, first things first, right? Somebody must be in a position to justify that knowledge in general exists and justify how knowledge is possible. If any individual, even S over here, is going to be said to have some particular knowledge. That's why I'm saying there's a more general issue just about knowledge before we even get.
I guess I do want to get clear about what you mean, because it seems really weird to say that S justifying knowledge, that there is knowledge in general, is a precondition for knowledge. Because I think any epistemologist wants to say Bob at the grocery store has some knowledge, but Bob at the grocery store, I ask him justify how knowledge exists at all, he's gonna look at me like I'm a crazy person.
No, that's why I said in that statement, it was very clear, whether it's Bob or somebody needs to be able to justify it. Why? Because we're talking about it, right? So I'm actually admitting in the paper, of course, because I'm even sympathetic to some of the points that externalism makes, right? That you don't have to have this kind of first-person immediate access to the justifications, i.e. Bob, we're talking about Bob now, that he knows. I'm like, sure, I can grant that if it's a justification, right, if it's a reliable way of acquiring, and there's good reasons for Bob to believe it, whether he has internal access or not, I could grant that. I'm cool with that. What I'm not cool with, though, is if nobody can provide an account whether knowledge is even possible or exists, I'm not going to be like, now let's just talk about knowledge existing and the possibilities of it. I'm like, that I won't do. That's all I'm saying. And I think everybody would.
So you take that. So you think that a precondition. Sorry, this is just a little bit weird for me. I want to get clear about it, because this is specifically relating to the atheism theism discussion, right? Because you want to say that if an atheist, if you talk to a whole bunch of atheists or all the atheists and none of them can justify to you how the metaphysics are such that they're knowledge conducive, then atheists don't have knowledge. I
didn't say that.
Yeah, I just want to get clear about what it is that you are saying.
Because I actually believe that an atheist has knowledge and can have knowledge.
Okay.
What I don't think is they have justifications at the second order to talk about knowledge. That's why I made an important distinction between the first order and second order.
Okay.
I don't think that second order is necessary to have first order.
Right.
So, but what we're doing right now, we're talking about, we're at the second order. So what I'm not going to allow is people to make second order claims without making second order claims. Do you see what I'm saying? So I can grant it's possible, and even we theists, I hate using that term.
Yeah.
We Orthodox.
There you go.
I don't want to be put in the same category as we Orthodox believe atheists know stuff.
Right.
Okay, and I can even lean towards more of an externalist and reliabilist view, and I kind of do. I just don't think that in of itself could provide a justification. But in the sense that it's like, yeah, of course, if they have a reliable mechanism, right, that of course they could. But what we're doing when we're talking about metaphysics and epistemology, we're at the second order. Okay. And so that's why I'm saying there is no atheistic account that can give a second order account to talk about the first order, because that's what second order is, talking about the first. Correct?
So, well, yeah. So, well, a second order would be I know that I know P, or I know, yeah, that I know snow is white, something like that.
Or even making the statement at a meta language, as Tarski says, that S knows that P.
Now,
That actually is a second order.
there's, yeah. So
Now, whether that's actually knowledge or not is a second question, but it ends up in the meta language, right? Because it's not object language, it's meta language.
So just to be clear, you agree that on the conditional account, so where S knows that P, if and only if S has an apt true belief that P, for example, that if no atheist is able to justify the possibility of knowledge in the first place, they still have the first order knowledge. They're just aren't able to justify this like second order knowledge.
Yes, and then it has deeper consequences that we can go into later, but I can never get out of making meta language statements, right? So it ends up being a defeater for me even asserting first order.
Yeah.
So but that's a further argument down the line. But you're following so far.
Okay. So on this view, though, atheists can have knowledge. We're at least in agreement about that.
I'm going to start with that. I'm going to grant it, basically.
Yeah.
Then,
Grant you that you could have first order. That second order is not a necessary condition for second order at this point.
Then it sounds like the question is just. It sounds
But
like
I
the question.
specifically wanted to bring this up. I'm just setting up the stage so I can get to your hypothetical, because I actually create an argument to deal with the hypothetical. That you brought up. And by hypothetical, we mean the if-then.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I just meant to qualify for our audience. Hypothetical, we don't mean like a hypothetical thought experiment, but the conditional statement, if-then.
The one thing I want to flag, because you do keep talking about justifying that knowledge exists in the first place, or that knowledge is possible in the first place, is on our view, we would be able to know the second order knowledge statements. Justification wouldn't be a component for that, right? We're going to know those second order or nth order. We're going to have nth order knowledge if and only if we have apt true belief of the nth order proposition or sentence. So we can talk about
to have justification for that.
Justification's not a component of knowledge on our view. We divorce the idea of justification from knowledge.
All right, well then I'll roll it back to a third order and be like, why should I think that that's a reason that I should accept, right? So, and look,
I don't think we said that you should.
Quine does the same thing, right? Where he thinks in his naturalized epistemology that he can get out of the question of justification, right? But the thing is, that just moves it back to a further order in which you're going to require justification. So you never actually, by doing what you're doing, you don't get out of that problem.
Wait, I don't remember saying that you should you should accept what we're saying. I don't think we said that. Like maybe you shouldn't.
The thing is that like the problem here is that like we would like maybe we would hold judgment, or actually maybe even reject that justification is a necessary component for knowledge. So that when you say something like you must justify knowledge, that's just not going to be something we're going to accept.
Well, then you forfeited the argument. Like, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
You're not going to have any force of argument or justification of why I should accept that.
That doesn't follow.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it doesn't follow from the fact that justification is not a necessary condition for knowledge, that therefore we don't have justification for a particular belief. It could be the case, on our view, we have knowledge and we don't have justification, or that we have justification, we don't have knowledge, or that we have justification and knowledge of a particular belief.
But you're now back into a meta statement about the statement, in which case you're going to have justification need to be a necessary condition for even the possibility of what you're actually stating. So I've seen this. You're not going to be able to get out of this, right? Because of the very fact of these kind of meta statements doesn't get out of the possibility that you're going to actually have to be in the issue providing a justification about whatever you're saying is required or not required. The
point is that if you say it's necessary to have justification in order for us to know that P, whether P is first order knowledge, second order knowledge, or nth order knowledge, is just going to be to beg the question against our epistemic view. It's not to engage with the epistemic view.
Well, suppose I grant that, but then there is no position argued for. There's no position against the theistic, the Orthodox, excuse me. I'm going to correct myself on that, right? You're at the level of somebody basically, and I'm not literally saying you guys are at the level because you're actually very intelligent, but you've seen this where
the best atheists that have ever come on. So I appreciate that.
You guys are great.
You guys are great.
But you have seen people that give this story, right? About, well, here, actually, this is what I believe. And I guess we could say, in the sense, that's a possibility, but ultimately reduces to all you're telling me is a psychological report about I've constructed a story.
Right.
And I feel like that's what's going on here. You've constructed a story. What do I do with that beyond simply just analyzing it as a psychological self-report? If you denied that I don't need to provide a justification for my justification criteria.
Well, the claim specifically was that we don't need justification to know that P, on our view. Not that, like, you can't ask us to justify something and we might be able to justify it, we might not be able to. The only thing I said is that we don't need to be justified to know that P, on our view.
Yeah, and to add to that, more specifically about any order of knowledge that you want to add to the stack of knowledge, whether it's K of K, K of K, right? Doesn't matter, right? For any order of knowledge, if you're gonna add the justification condition, we're just gonna no, we don't need that. We're just gonna add our view, epistemic view, and that's just gonna be doing the explaining for every order of knowledge that you stack on.
Just to add, it seems like your question is, how do we motivate this view, or what can we offer that might? No, that's not what you're asking. It sounded like that was what you were asking.
No, so suppose you're making an assertion. I don't need a justification criteria or principle for the first order. Now, first of all, that's just bizarre as an externalist. I've never heard an externalist say that, because externalism is the justification, or reliabilism, right, is the justification. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I haven't read all the literature on, but you're saying no, that
not on
the reliable mechanism, causal mechanism, whether it's the virtue or the
true believing manifesting an agent's competencies.
What's that?
True believing being a manifestation of an agent's competencies.
And what does competencies mean?
You're asking, like, what are competencies? They're going to be dispositions to form true beliefs in certain conditions.
And you're telling me that doesn't go into the category of justification?
You can call it justification usually, or I don't want to say usually, but a lot of times when philosophers are talking about justification, they're talking about something like reasons for a belief, right?
Well, that's why I'm saying, like, you don't need to couch it in terms, because that almost leads you into an internalist or something like that. I don't think we need to say that. We could just flat out deny, okay, the reasons, because when I hear that, then it's like you might think that I have to have access to those reasons or something like that. And then I'm led into internalism. But the fact of the matter is, it still seems I could deny that. You're still providing me metaphysics of what dispositions and competencies would lead to X versus Y. And this is what we would call X would be knowledge and Y wouldn't be. Then that's a reason, even when I'm denying internalism.
Okay, so sorry, can you just repeat that last bit of what you take what you were taking to be a reason there? Just that last sentence.
Reason would be that is a positive sense of, how should I put this? What if I rolled it back for the audience? I'm not saying I accept it, but most people would. A principle of sufficient reason, like a Leibnizian or something like that. Things happen, right?
I think the principle of sufficient reason, the word reason used
you're too much
an
internal.
explanation.
Trying to get away from that. Yeah.
That's very different than the notion of reason used in epistemology. Because
okay, let me put it this way: a normative mechanism, right?
Yeah. So
would you accept that?
I agree. That's how I'm understanding reasons, and I don't think that the way that we're laying out knowledge, we're including that sort of reason in the equation.
You're definitely including the normative mechanism.
The normative mechanism is not in some idea of justification. It's in the idea that knowledge is a success. That's where the normativity plays a role in the account of knowledge.
Or credit. Or credit. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're saying it's a success.
Yeah, true. Yeah, gaining knowledge is a cognitive success. That's where the normativity plays into this.
But the problem is, again, it does get us, and I'm not understanding why you can't see this. I'm not trying to be rude. That you're in an epistemic privileged position to decide what's actually success. So what I feel like is
we can talk about that.
And swindles where you're trying to switch around, but you're ultimately avoiding the issue that every single philosopher is trying to get around this, but they never get out of you have no justification, or you can't, let's put this, you can't give a coherent account of how you would actually determine success from not success without vicious circularity.
So, okay, the claim here is I can't give an account of how I determine a success of true believing from a instance of false believing. That you're saying that I can't, in principle, give a way to distinguish between the two.
Without vicious circularity. In other words, well, if my position's true that I'm telling you at this order, then the rest of the stuff that I'm saying about it works is true. But wait a minute. So we're back to this dialectical tension. One is true if two is true. Two is true if one is true.
The problem here is that we stop the regress at a point. We say, no, it's not one is true. If two is true, we axe it off. And we say, doesn't matter whether two or one or anything is true. None of that's needed. for one. We don't need to ask any further question or go back further. That's what the externalist is doing. And
well, I know what they're doing, but the problem is you can do whatever you want. That doesn't mean that you ought to do it or that it's legitimate. So all you're telling me is that, well, I just cut off and ignore any objections and say, again, this is why I brought this up, that all the philosophical systems, particularly after modernity, are system building in which they build the operating system such that questions can't be asked, right? And so that's why I brought up earlier, Patrick, that Hegel says the truth is the system, the fact that I built it. And if the facts contradict it, the facts be damned, right? I just ignore the facts. And that seems to be what you're doing. Well, we just deny that because that would refute our position. I'm like, I know that you're doing that.
It's really weird. This objection is really weird to me because it almost, I don't think you're doing this intentionally. It almost seems like a straw man because Ferdy and I aren't saying that we can't give reasons or justifications, even in the normative sense, to hold our view, or that we can't give motivations or arguments or anything like that. All we're saying is that we don't take those to be necessary components of knowledge. And it seems like that's not what you're attacking. You're just saying that you're construing the view as if we don't have any of these reasons or justifications at all.
So which leads me to, again, the thing that then you need to be able to provide a criteria for your justification criteria.
Well,
and it can't be, if that's a number two, and number two says to go see number one, and it's only true for number one, it seems to me you're caught in a dialectical tension in which you never can resolve that. Why? Because it's what you set up.
I mean, or
now,
you
maybe,
can.
I hope I'm not straw manning or something like that. Like, and I'm giving you the opportunity to explain, but I'm thoroughly confused. And I think our audience is of why, like, anybody would want to ever accept your story and picture of reality.
There's two questions there. There's one which is the problem of the criterion question, which I've already given the answer to. I don't see why it's unproblematic to just stop the regress and say you have a conditional account of knowledge. If these conditions obtain, then you know whether you know the conditions obtain or not. And I think you could do the same thing with justification. You could have an externalist account of justification or a reductionist account of justification. You're justified if and only if there's an argument, or you're justified if and only if S serves as a justifier for P, if and only if S raises the probability that P, something like that, some reductive account of justification. Now, the question of can we give any reasons or motivations in the normative sense for our view is a separate question. And I think the answer is that we can. And we can do that through conceptual analysis. We can give cases where people are going to have the dispositions to call those cases knowledge or not knowledge. And we can analyze those cases and see if the sufficient conditions for knowledge we laid out are true. And that's going to serve to motivate the view. We can give things like Gettier cases, for example.
But I don't think people are concerned about motivation. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
Again, it isn't an issue. I mean, I guess you could go an infinite regress, but my argument wasn't about an infinite regress. It was about a vicious circularity, and with the two categories of dialectical tension are involved, can't do the work that they want it to do. That was my argument, and I reduced your system to ultimately it reduces to that. So I'm not going the infinite regress. I mean, I know that people could go that way, and that's why I don't want you to think about. I mean, we could go that way because you're making statements about statements or something like that. And by reasons, you're just saying giving motivations. But again, that doesn't get me to a veridical world. And it certainly doesn't get me to the normative world. And I know this because my PhD advisor, who's an atheist, is a Salesian externalist. Like, I've worked through all these arguments, and his book, if I could pull it out, Naturalism with a Normative Turn. So I know all these kind of arguments, and it's what led me to actually create these arguments. I'm like, it doesn't work. It doesn't get out of the problem.
I mean, you can say it doesn't work. Saying it doesn't work isn't really giving an objection. The point I was giving about the two things that you're referring to, which are intention, those are the two questions, the two problem with the criterion questions, right? Those are the two things that you're referring to there. Am I correct?
I'm not reducing it to, I mean, I guess it's something similar to the criterion problem. What I'm saying is there's an epistemological, however you want to cash that out, and there's a metaphysical description, right? So whether it's about motivations, competencies, et cetera, et cetera.
Let me try to recreate the problem, and you tell me if I'm understanding it correctly. Okay. So you're saying is you have one question. The question is, are the metaphysical laws and state of affairs that we're in conducive to knowledge, or the metaphysical state of affairs that follow from your view, or those conducive to knowledge? That might be a more accurate way to put it. And then the other is, do you have the beliefs that count as knowledge that those that those metaphysical laws and states of affairs are knowledge conducive? Are those the two questions, or is one of those questions different from the questions that you're asking?
I think that's right. If I heard you, so there's one about what does the world look like, right?
Yeah.
What do you look like? What does your mechanisms and faculties and competencies look like? And then there's a question of and how do I know? Correct?
Yeah.
So I got two categories. I think we're fair on that.
Yeah, those two categories. Yeah.
Now, I know one determines the other. Because if there wasn't a world, if there wasn't an ontology, there would be no knowers. So I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
But I got
go ahead.
different metaphysical stories that I'm hearing from everybody. So suppose I wasn't an Orthodox Christian. Suppose I'm a student in philosophy class. I'd be curious, well, which one's right?
Yeah, so what Ferdy and I are saying is that the answer to question 2, what is knowledge, how do you know, is metaphysic agnostic, not in the case that the metaphysics don't determine whether there are any knowers, or that the metaphysics don't determine whether the conditions are knowledge conducive at all, but in the sense that it's conditional. It's if certain conditions obtain, then there's knowledge. It's a reductive account.
That's why I want to go to my next part that I wrote about that. And then let's just see what you have to say about that. Maybe
just if I could just finish that one sentence there. So that theory of knowledge isn't like unique to atheists either. Like a theist could hold it. It's just going to be, maybe you're a theist, you have God in your view, and from God you can derive all the metaphysical commitments such that the state of affairs is knowledge conducive. Well, then the antecedent obtains, you have knowledge. Maybe you have some crazy solipsist worldview and knowledge collapses. Or maybe solipsism is true and the possibility of knowledge collapses, or the state of affairs is such that there's no agents, the antecedent doesn't obtain, there's no knowledge. In both those cases, the metaphysics are completely different, but the answer to the second question remains the same. Still that conditional.
Okay, I'm gonna disagree with that. So, and the reason why is because you're making, so there's, in one sense, I can say it's possible that the first order S knows that P. And like you said, and I'm agnostic, I don't know how, but I don't have to know how for it to be possible. Did I get that correctly?
No, sorry. What I meant when I said that the conditional account of knowledge was metaphysic agnostic. What I'm saying is that it works under any view of metaphysics, that it's compatible with any view of metaphysics. That's what that meant in that context.
Well, I'd like to see that. Like, that's a pretty amazing claim. But let's move to see if this answers the questions. Because I thought about the exact same way, because what you want to do as a philosopher is you want to be able to entertain the opposite position without necessarily accepting it. And so I'm trying to think through these issues with you and be like, this is what I would say. If I was an externalist and I was an atheist, this is what I would do. Okay, so I actually addressed this in the paper, that the focus of our concern is about being able to justify the possibility of knowledge in general, which is a second order claim, whether it is a person knowing or another person making the claim, because this is what we're doing. I'm fine with saying, in some sense, Bob could actually know, regardless of when everybody can get an account. But the problem is I can never get out of the second order. We're all talking about it. So it will affect the first order. I can't. Why? Because I'm always in the second order. I'm always making a claim about the first order. Okay, so one possible way, I thought, if I were you, to solve this is frame it into a conditional, right? Which is what you do. That I'm just thinking like what I would do if I were you.
Yeah, like the reductive account. S knows that P, if and only if.
If it turns out, let's say this. If it turns out knowledge is possible, then my true belief under certain specified conditions, which you gave, right? Mm-hmm. And fill in whatever specified conditions you want, would amount to knowledge. So does everybody understand me what the conditional is? Yeah. If knowledge turns out to be possible, because this is really what it's.
I don't know if you need to have the if knowledge turns out to be possible part. It's probably covered under the other conditions, right? If knowledge isn't possible, I don't think the other conditions are true anyways.
Yes. So I'm a first year philosophy student. I want to be like, well, I just want to know if knowledge is possible. Okay. So you're like, well, let's frame it in a conditional. If knowledge turns out to be possible, in other words, it's possible for Bob to know, then my true belief under whatever specified certain conditions that I wanted to put in there would amount to knowledge. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I thought, well, what would a critique of that be? Well, then that just seems to reduce to tautology. Knowledge exists if knowledge exists. Or we could have knowledge before having a criteria or justification for correct or reliable methodology for. So again, I'm always at the second order knowledge, right? So we can talk about and try to turn the conversation to first order knowledge and talk about, well, it's possible. Either that will reduce to a tautology, or I'm simply always stuck at the second order, right? Knowledge claim. Talking about. Now, if it's not possible, then second order knowledge claims are meaningless, right? About that it is possible because that's a knowledge claim. That's what my argument is.
Maybe and not meaningless, but false. Yeah. Or you're not going to have knowledge. If knowledge isn't possible, you're not going to have knowledge.
Yeah. And then what I'm saying is there's no account that can be given of knowledge, either because it's viciously circular, either goes into an infinite regress, right, to provide a criteria for your criteria for your criteria, or it ends up that again, if I just simply, I want to know if it's possible, that's a second order. I'm in the second order. It's only possible if the first, so here's the dialectical tension. So, but I can't talk about the first or give any reasons or criteria for that without actually assuming what I want to prove.
Yeah, so I want to say one thing about, well, there's a third one there that you highlighted, which is that it's a tautology. And I want to address that one. So it seems to me like tautology for people in the audience is just going to be something that's true by definition. So
or just repeat it, like A is A, a pen is a pen.
If and only if P, if and only if P. Now, when we're giving necessary and sufficient conditions for something, that's like the necessary and sufficient conditions for the thing. I think that they're each distinct from the thing. So yeah, knowledge is going to be equivalent to the conjunction of all these necessary and sufficient things, and it might be a tautology in that sense, but it's not meaningless. It's not meaningless if I say water is H2O. So in any possible state of affairs where we end up with hydrogen, we end up with oxygen, and we have the chemistry in such a way that they're able to interact and form H2O. In those possible worlds, we're going to have water. It's true, but it's true in all that statement. If you have H2O, then you have water, is true in all possible worlds, but it's not like meaningless or uninformative, right?
It doesn't do any work for what we wanted to do. That's why I said it's a problematic tautology within the scope of what we're defining. I know that tautology is necessary to actually establish meaning. That's one of the first kind of rules.
It seems to me clear what epistemologists are doing when they account for knowledge is laying out the necessary and sufficient conditions. Do you disagree with that?
Sorry, say that again?
It seems clear to me that what epistemologists are doing when they are investigating what knowledge is they're trying to identify the necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's a second order statement about knowledge.
By the idea, by the type of tautology concern that you're highlighting, that's going to apply to any account of knowledge where you lay out the necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge, correct?
Well, I'm not concerned about definitions. Again, I'm concerned about or whether we'll ever appeal to tautologies. I'm saying it if the only way out of this problem is to make a conditional, right? The conditional, what that says is a tautology. Knowledge exists if knowledge exists. And what I'm saying is that tautology might be fine for certain things, but it ain't doing the work here. Because saying knowledge exists if knowledge exists is not actually going to give me an account for why is your account correct? And how is that even going to do the work? That's why I was put in the sense of like, is my statement going to do the work that I want it to do? How is saying that knowledge exists if knowledge exists is going to answer the question about whether knowledge is possible?
So
tautologies, it's like, what are you doing with them is my issue.
Yeah, it's not super clear to me. It's not super clear to me that it is a tautology, at least only in the sense that the necessary and sufficient conditions do entail the concept. So if A and B and C and D imply Q, A, B, C, D, E, therefore Q, where Q is knowledge. I don't even know if that is a tautology, but
that's why couched in terms of, I want to know, suppose I'm a first year philosophy student, I want to know if knowledge is even possible. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the way out of that issue, and to answer that is, if knowledge is possible, then knowledge is possible, is not going to be satisfying. That's what I'm saying. And ultimately,
that's not what we're saying exactly. We're saying if condition one obtains, condition two obtains, condition three obtains, then S knows that P. And whether knowledge is possible is another topic. We can talk about whether or not knowledge is possible. But to me, that's just a question of That's just we can reduce that down to a question of, are there beliefs that are true, and are there competencies that are manifested in true believing? If we can answer yes to all three of those questions, then knowledge is not only possible, but is the case in some situations.
All right,
And we can treat each of those as separate questions. So
I think you're missing the argument. Everything that you've been saying are at second order. Okay. And what I'm saying is second order is talking about first order. And if second order is talking about the possibility of Bob knowing, second order needs to establish that that's even a possibility.
Right.
And because you're always at the second order, you can never get to the first order, which is where you want to actually go.
Yeah,
the things that I outlined. And I don't think you're seeing that argument.
No, so I'm making some modal argument. I can give it to you like semi-formally. It's going to be P and Q and R imply S, possibly P and Q and R, possibly S. So the conclusion is possibly knowledge. Now, does that argument strike you as valid? That the form, just strictly talking about the form here.
Yeah, I mean, if I was teaching a logic class, which I do, yeah, I'd be like, yeah, you got the true, correct, is valid. I mean,
so then we can analyze the premises there, which are going to be possibly P, possibly Q, and possibly R, which is why I said previous to your last statement, the conversation is going to be about is belief possible, is truth possible, and is absence possible. I would assume that we would all agree on those three premises, but maybe we need to explore them further.
Well, in regards to exploring them further, we'll have to save that for a later date. Well, we've been streaming for 4 hours at this point, and I think this is a good point. I think we've come down to the crux of your externalism and how that is going to differentiate in regards to the justification of knowledge itself and where you guys view the project you guys are working with. And I want to thank both you guys, Impulse and Amdir, for coming on and sharing your guys' perspective. You guys have been incredibly respectful, and this has been a very highfalutin conversation. I think many people in the live chat have appreciated just to hear the vernacular and the going back and forth between these ideas. I want to give Impulse and Amdir any opportunity, anything you guys want to say before we kind of close down shop, and I'm going to wrap up some of these super chats. Feel free.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. It was good discussion. I'd love to follow it up sometime and see if we can get a little bit deeper into where exactly the disagreement is.
Yeah, we could do that again. We could try to set up a part 2. How did you guys find the stream? I'm just curious on how to contact you guys, or if we did a part 2.
Oh, this Zen Shapiro guy sent it to me. I don't know if you know him.
Oh yeah, we know Zen.
No, I've never heard of him in my life.
Okay, so all right, well then Zen knows how to get a hold of you guys. So if we want to set up a part 2, he can reach out to you guys.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Impulse, anything you want to say before hopping off, brother?
Now, this was fun. I mean, I didn't contribute that much, but I hold the same views because I'm outside, family's sleeping. But yeah.
Well, same. That's why I let FDA. This is sort of his wheelhouse. So I let him kind of steer the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe next time if we plan it out, I'll get a bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sitting down.
No, this is great. Yeah, totally agree there.
For sure. Yeah.
All right. Well,
definitely
gentlemen.
down.
Well, even though you don't believe, God bless you both. We wish you guys both nothing but the best, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Wish you the best as well.
Yep.